In the final winter of the Second World War, the front lines blurred beneath collapsing empires, and victory became a contest not of nations, but of what could be hidden before the guns fell silent. Across Europe, convoys moved without insignia, orders were spoken rather than written, and men vanished under new identities forged in the ashes of defeat. Allied intelligence called it the Black Transfer, a silent war over the Reich's most forbidden archives. What began as a race to end the conflict became something far darker, a struggle to possess the truth itself, within sealed bunkers, in files marked most secret, and in testimonies whispered decades later. Fragments of a different ending to the war have surfaced, pieces of a history that was never meant to be found. Chapter 1. Operation Eclipse. The Missing Reich Archives. On the night of April 25, 1945, as the Red Army encircled Berlin and Allied bombers roared over the dying Reich, a small convoy departed from the Tiergarten under heavy fog. Witnesses later described it as 3 trucks, escorted by SS guards wearing unmarked insignia, heading southwest under false Wehrmacht orders. Their destination, as uncovered decades later in a declassified British file, was Wewelsburg, Himmler's ceremonial stronghold and alleged repository for the Reich's most secret archives. The mission bore the codename Operation Eclipse, not to be confused with the publicized Allied plan for occupation zones. This eclipse was something else, a parallel operation designed to erase, not recover. British Field Security Section 560, attached to the 30th Corps, received an intercepted German transmission near Paderborn, referring to Bureau 47 transit under black conditions. The phrase was repeated twice, followed by coordinates that, when cross-checked, led to an abandoned Luftwaffe airstrip. When the first British unit reached the site 3 days later, they found scorched crates, melted wax seals, and fragments of what appeared to be coded microfilm reels. Each bore the initials B47 Alpha. The discovery was immediately classified under a most secret UK eyes-only order and forwarded to the Directorate of Intelligence in London. The files were never acknowledged again. Post-war British records make no mention of any Bureau 47. However, a footnote in the 1946 Scheif Intelligence Summary alludes to a sub-office of the RSHA concerned with scientific and diplomatic coordination. In simpler terms, it likely handled Nazi research collaborations with neutral states: Sweden, Switzerland, Spain, and possibly Japan. The disappearance of those crates was not an isolated incident. Between May and August 1945, Allied reports document at least 9 similar seizures by unregistered personnel wearing British uniforms but answering to no identifiable command. Their movements were traced to a secure depot near Garmisch-Partenkirchen, operated under the innocuous title of Combined Research Recovery Unit, CRRU. Within 2 months, the unit dissolved. Its commanding officer, a certain Lieutenant Colonel Raymond C. Holland, resigned citing ill health and emigrated to Canada in 1947. He was never interviewed again. In 1953, during an internal review of post-war debriefing archives, a Foreign Office clerk stumbled upon an unsigned memorandum labelled Eclipse Redirect. It referenced 42 crates, extracted from Berlin area, diverted to US custody via Munich corridor, per Directive M17. The document bore the initials RCH matching Holland. Curiously, American declassification under the Freedom of Information Act decades later revealed no such M17 directive. However, a single declassified CIA index card lists Project Eclipse, Technical Evaluation 1946, source British. That card was stamped inactive. Destroyed 1958 DAOs. Eyewitness accounts from RAF transport crews suggest at least one of the crates reached the United Kingdom. An RAF Dakota, serial number KG477, departed Munich Rhein on June 2, 1945, en route to an airfield in Gloucestershire. The flight never arrived. The Air Ministry reported severe electrical failure over France. No wreckage was found. Yet, a private note from Wing Commander Harold Elms, unearthed in 1981, contradicts this. Elms wrote to a colleague, "The Dakota landed at Bryce Norton after nightfall. Cargo transferred by lorry. Crew instructed to remain silent under Official Secrets Act." The note was unsigned and vanished from the National Archives 2 months after discovery. By the late 1950s, fragments of the Eclipse materials resurfaced in an unexpected place. Within the records of the West German Foreign Ministry, a file labeled Bonn Archive Recovery 1963 contained a burned ledger referencing Eclipse Crates, 1945 consignment, contents undecipherable. The Bonn police report described the scene: a fire in a government storage vault, origin unknown, limited to one room. Inside, investigators found melted film reels, charred folders, and a partially intact stamp bearing the insignia of the British War Office. No cause was ever officially released. What might those files have contained? Some historians believe they included secret correspondence between the Nazi government and multinational corporations operating through neutral intermediaries. Others speculate about technical documentation, V2 guidance systems, nerve agent precursors, or psychological warfare studies later assimilated by Allied research divisions. A more controversial theory suggests Operation Eclipse was not merely a recovery effort, but a pre-arranged handover, negotiated between select Nazi officials and Western intelligence in exchange for protection. Support for this comes from a memorandum written by OSS officer Alan Dulles in Switzerland, April 1945. Certain archives should be preserved in Western hands to ensure post-war stability. The language is chillingly pragmatic. In 1979, journalist Peter Lovett, investigating post-war intelligence cooperation, obtained an interview with an aging MI6 logistician, codenamed Archer. Archer described being stationed in Bavaria in May 1945 when he received sealed orders from a London address that did not exist. He was to provide vehicles and drivers for sensitive cultural material. When he protested the lack of documentation, his superior told him bluntly, "The material is British property. The Germans no longer own their secrets." Archer remembered one crate, heavier than the others, marked with a black sun emblem and the words "Nur für Adleraugen," for eagle eyes only. Within days, all crates were loaded onto trucks under American guard. When Archer tried to revisit the depot weeks later, it had been emptied, fenced, and reassigned to US personnel. In 1991, after the Cold War ended, fragments of Operation Eclipse finally surfaced in the British National Archives, but heavily redacted. The remaining entries consist of nothing more than transfer orders, vague descriptions of recovered German scientific materials, and recurring instructions to forward data to Technical Section, Washington Liaison. No mention of Bureau 47, the missing Dakota, or the Garmisch Depot. The word Eclipse appears 3 times, each time crossed out by hand. A final thread emerged in 2007, when a researcher at the Bundesarchiv in Koblenz discovered a mislabeled reel of microfilm catalogued under agricultural imports. Upon restoration, the film contained fragments of correspondence between the Reich Ministry of Armaments and an unknown British intermediary dated January 1945, months before Germany's surrender. The signatures were indecipherable, but the final line remained legible. Shipment prepared per Eclipse protocol, secure from Soviet interference. No one has publicly claimed responsibility for the disappearance of those 42 crates, nor has any government acknowledged possessing them. Yet within NATO communications archives, a single entry remains active under the codename Eclipse, Alpha, Black. Its status reads only, held in trust, not for disclosure. For those who have spent their careers chasing the ghost of Operation Eclipse, that single phrase is confirmation enough that somewhere, behind layers of bureaucracy and silence, the missing Reich archives still exist, waiting for the light to fall upon them once again. Chapter 2. The Red Line Conspiracy. Ghosts of Dresden. In February 1945, Dresden was more than a city. It was a junction. Every road, every rail line converged there, linking Berlin, Prague, and Leipzig to the industrial heart of the Reich. What the Allied bombers obliterated on the nights of February 13th and 14th was not just Baroque stone and civilians. They unknowingly buried the entrance to one of the Reich's last logistical miracles, Operation Red Line. For years, historians assumed the tunnels beneath Dresden were for air raid shelters or factory storage, but declassified Soviet intelligence from 1991 tells a darker story, one that begins months before the city's annihilation. According to a March 1945 NKVD report labeled File 18-9, Red Line Transit, the SS established an underground freight corridor stretching nearly 30 kilometers from the banks of the Elbe River to the Ore Mountains near Altenburg. It was constructed by forced laborers from Theresienstadt and Flossenburg, over 6,000 men and women whose names appear on no German record after that date. Soviet field officers described steel-lined passageways, rail tracks narrow enough for mining trolleys, and ventilation shafts disguised as bomb craters. The project's overseer was said to be SS Sturmbannführer Hans-Erich Kessler, formerly attached to the Technische Nordhilfe Engineering Corps. His fate remains unknown. The tunnel's purpose was obscured behind conflicting codenames: V-material in German archives, Red Line in Soviet debriefs, and Eisenpfad, the Iron Path, in intercepted communications between SS logistics divisions. Each referred to strategic freight evacuated from Berlin as the Allies closed in. Soviet reports make mention of sealed freight cars loaded with technical materials and private documents. But the most chilling line appears at the end of one intercepted order: no witnesses above ground, all entries to be sealed upon departure. When the Red Army entered Dresden in May 1945, NKVD reconnaissance units were instructed to prioritize tunnel entrances before engaging remaining Wehrmacht holdouts. The order was stamped "Personal to Comrade Serov," then head of Soviet counterintelligence. One unit under Major Pavel Artyomovich reported finding an entrance near the Freiburger Strasse rail yard. Inside, they discovered collapsed concrete and the remains of German guards shot at close range. Beyond the debris lay freight cars fused by heat and 2 unburned crates. Their contents were never officially described, but the field logbook notes glass containers with preserved biological samples and mechanical components resembling gyroscopes. The crates were transported east under armed escort. Within 6 months, all records of Major Artyomovich's detachment disappeared from Soviet rosters. In 1947, the CIA's newly formed Scientific Intelligence Division compiled a classified assessment titled Ghosts of Dresden. Declassified fragments mention post-war Soviets, recovery of technological assets beneath Elbe Valley, and localized radiation signatures. Inconsistent with conventional munitions, the agency dispatched a covert engineering team, disguised as humanitarian surveyors, to examine Dresden's reconstruction zone. One of them, engineer William B. Tate, later testified in a private interview before his death in 1983. "We found heat patterns underground where there should have been none. The Soviets had sealed off entire sections with poured concrete. They told us it was to stabilize the ruins, but we heard drilling, constant, rhythmic, mechanical drilling." Post-war East German authorities maintained strict control over construction permits in the Altstadt sector. The municipal engineering archives show that between 1948 and 1961, 27 applications for subterranean reconstruction were denied for geological instability. However, geotechnical surveys from 1964 reveal anomalies, magnetic distortions and voids at depths exceeding 30 meters. When Western researchers requested access, the Stasi classified the area as a restricted cultural site, effectively closing it to foreign inspection for the remainder of the Cold War. In 1989, as East Germany crumbled, a defector identified only as Eric F. crossed into the West carrying 2 microfilm reels hidden in a tube of toothpaste. The reels were later authenticated by the Bundesnachrichtendienst (BND). Their contents included partial blueprints of an underground freight tunnel marked Red Line Section D, Elbe Transfer. Stamped across each page was the Totenkopf insignia of the SS and the words "Nur für Adleraugen." Accompanying notes referenced compartmentalized, loading, and evacuation of cultural scientific cargo per Führerbefehl, 745. Historians debated whether cultural scientific referred to art looting or weapons development, but Eric insisted that the cargo was not human, not art, something between. Satellite imagery from the early 1990s, analyzed by NATO's Defense Mapping Agency, shows unusual ground sink patterns south of the city, consistent with long-collapsed subterranean structures. Yet, when German authorities conducted exploratory drilling in 1994, they halted operations after detecting toxic industrial residues. The official explanation blamed wartime chemical storage. Unofficially, 2 workers were hospitalized after exposure to unknown fumes. Samples disappeared en route to Berlin's Institute for Environmental Analysis. The missing laborers, the sealed cars, the crates, all trace back to the same silent order. Red Line remains under protection until directive nullified. Who issued that directive remains unclear. Soviet archives point to the NKVD. Western intelligence suspected remnants of the SS Forschungsgemeinschaft Ahnenerbe, the occult scientific division operating under Himmler. The connection gained weight when, in 1997, Czech spelunkers exploring an abandoned mine near the border discovered rusted railway segments and a German warning plate reading Hochspannung, Betreten verboten. Embedded in the wall behind it was a corroded steel plaque stamped RL 12-45. Witness accounts from surviving locals reinforced the aura of secrecy. An elderly resident, Gertrude Lehmann, recalled being evacuated from Dresden's outskirts in March 1945 by soldiers who told her the ground itself must be protected. Decades later, she swore she could still hear machinery humming beneath the cobblestones after the bombing stopped. Even after reunification, Dresden's city planners avoided major excavation in the affected zone. When pressed, the official response was that the foundations are unpredictable. Privately, one engineer admitted, "Some things under the old city are better left undisturbed. They are not ruins, they are instructions." Operation Redline remains one of the least documented wartime undertakings in Europe. Neither German nor Soviet records identify a full command structure. Every recovered document ends in May 1945, as if the operation was deliberately erased mid-execution. Still, occasional whispers persist in intelligence circles. Reports of sealed shafts detected by ground-penetrating radar, of Soviet-era vaults emitting unexplained heat even after 70 years. In 2015, a classified German-British excavation proposal, codenamed Project Mirror, was submitted to the Bundeswehr's Historical Research Office. The goal? Verify the existence of redline tunnels beneath Dresden's southern grid. Funding was approved. Work began discreetly in 2017. Within 2 months, operations ceased without explanation. When journalists filed information requests, the Defense Ministry responded with a single line. The excavation area contains legacy contamination of unknown origin. What the Red Line carried out of Dresden, whether technology, evidence, or something else entirely, has never been determined. What remains is silence reinforced by concrete and time, and the faint suggestion that beneath the city rebuilt from fire and ash, something still sleeps in the dark, humming softly through the soil, awaiting the day its root is rediscovered. Chapter 3. The Cold Vault, NATO's Hidden Laboratory. In the summer of 1952, the town of Kaiserslautern, in the newly formed Federal Republic of Germany, buzzed with the machinery of NATO construction. What was publicly presented as a communications hub for Western defense coordination concealed something few civilians, or even most soldiers, knew existed. Beneath the reinforced concrete of Installation K6 Town, laborers unearthed a sealed hatch of stainless steel, welded shut and bearing a date stamped in faded black paint. December 1944. The foreman reported it through military channels. Within 24 hours, the site was cordoned off by uniformed Americans carrying no visible insignia. The hatch and everything beneath it vanished from all official construction maps. Declassified fragments from the US Army Corps of Engineers, discovered decades later, refer to the anomaly only once. Subsurface structure, 12 meter depth, presumed German origin. But in an internal NATO memorandum from October 1952, recently uncovered in Brussels, a new designation appears. Project Harborlight. The document is brief, stamped top secret, eyes NATO only, and references controlled recovery and evaluation of pre-surrender material, priority biological and navigational. A week later, 6 sealed containers arrived from Wiesbaden by convoy and disappeared beneath installation K6. The Cold Vault, as technicians later called it, had been born. Eyewitness accounts describe a makeshift laboratory, walls coated with condensation, lights flickering against frost that never seemed to thaw. The temperature was kept near freezing, maintained by a prototype refrigeration system imported from the United States. A British liaison officer, Captain Dennis Cole, recalled in a private letter to his wife, "The air burns the lungs. There's something alive down there. No one says it, but everyone feels it." His letter was intercepted and classified for over 40 years. When the vault was opened, engineers found dozens of steel canisters labeled biologisch material, Berlin 1944. Inside were sealed glass ampules suspended in clear gel. Accompanying documents bore the letterhead of the Reichsluftfahrtministerium, the Nazi Air Ministry, and contained references to Versuchseinheit Kälte Physik, experimental unit, cold physics. The canisters, several marked with red bands, were shipped under US guard to the subterranean laboratory, where joint American-British teams began studying their contents. Chemical analysis logs, now partially declassified, indicate traces of cryogenic compounds derived from liquid oxygen and methanol, precursors to high-altitude aviation research, but the focus soon shifted from physics to biology. A surviving technician, interviewed anonymously in 1988, described what he witnessed. Some of the vials contained tissue, not from animals. They looked human, small fragments, frozen and preserved without decay. We were told it was for medical study, but the Americans took over after the third day. They locked the vault and dismissed the locals. His testimony was dismissed as fabrication, yet the pattern of sealed reports, missing personnel, and erased inventories suggests otherwise. Harbourlight continued for years under the guise of communications testing. Every 6 months, new scientists arrived. None stayed long. Between 1954 and 1957, unexplained power surges plagued the Kaiserslautern base. Maintenance logs mention equipment failure due to condensation within classified areas. In one incident, a generator exploded, killing 2 contractors. Their death certificates were stamped confidential military accident. Afterward, the vault's power grid was rerouted through a separate substation, accessible only via coded magnetic keys, a technology not officially introduced to NATO installations until the 1970s. An internal report from the Supreme Headquarters, Allied Powers Europe, SHAPE, dated April 1958, notes irregularities in subterranean temperature readings and recommends permanent sealing of Vault Section 3. The recommendation was never implemented. Instead, records show a visit by Dr. Albert O. Pratt, an American biochemist affiliated with the Air Research and Development Command. Pratt's personal diary, released by his estate in 1996, mentions material recovered from German Polar Division, promising biological resistance data. No such Polar Division has ever been identified in Wehrmacht records. As NATO expanded through the 1960s, the vault remained an open secret among a select group of military physicians and intelligence officers. Some called it the German Ark, others, less reverent, either freezer. But the term Cold Vault first appears in 1967, correspondence between MI6's technical attaché and the US Defense Intelligence Agency. The Cold Vault remains active. Temperature regulation critical. Recommend discreet containment of subsection B after biological test failures. The failures were never described. 2 years later, Project Harbourlight was quietly decommissioned, or so the paperwork claimed. Then came the fire of 1978. On March 16, 1978, an electrical fault in the lower maintenance wing triggered alarms throughout installation K6. Firefighters arriving on scene found their hoses freezing mid-spray. It was like the air was alive, one firefighter recounted years later. You couldn't breathe near the lower levels. The pipes sweated frost, even while the walls burned. When the flames subsided, investigators discovered rooms filled with obsolete instruments, oscillographs, centrifuges, metal tables scorched to black. But what puzzled them most was a corridor ending abruptly in solid concrete, the same material used for the base's foundation, yet newer by decades. The next morning, NATO engineers arrived and ordered the area sealed under the official justification of structural integrity restoration. Within days, all reports from the fire were classified. In 1982, German newspapers briefly reported that unexplained electromagnetic interference had affected civilian radio transmissions near the base. Amateur operators recorded bursts of coded static every hour, always repeating the same pattern: 3 short, 1 long, 1 short. Analysis later matched this to the Morse letter R, but no one could identify its source. NATO denied operating any transmitters within that band. Curiously, the original Harbourlight directive used R as its internal file identifier. By 1999, portions of the vault had been converted into secure archives. A NATO spokesman described them as low-temperature data storage. Those satellite thermal scans from that period show a constant localized cold zone, -10°C. Beneath the installation, independent of external climate, engineers familiar with cryogenic systems stated that such sustained cooling would require a dedicated power source. Yet no corresponding energy allocation appears in NATO's budgets for the region. German parliamentary inquiry in 2003 requested access to the base to investigate rumors of illegal biological research. The request was denied by US command, citing joint security agreements predating the alliance. Internal minutes later, leaked to the press, showed references to legacy material predating 1945 still in containment. The statement was later retracted. Today, the cold vault remains sealed beneath Kaiserslautern, its original hatch welded and covered by reinforced flooring. Official tours of the base make no mention of it. Still, maintenance crews report areas where frost forms even during midsummer, and where compasses fail to hold direction. Former technicians speak of strange vibrations when near the lower walls, a deep, pulsing resonance like a heartbeat beneath the stone. The vault's existence has become a rumor too inconvenient to confirm. It lies between the layers of history and politics, frozen in time, a relic of an alliance built upon secrets older than itself. Whatever rests within its depths, tissue, data, or something neither living nor dead, remains entombed under NATO's longest silence. The cold vault endures, humming quietly beneath the flags of nations sworn to transparency, guarding a fragment of the Reich that never truly thawed. Chapter 4. Operation Nightglass, the vanishing U-boat fleet. At war's end in May 1945, Allied naval intelligence compiled meticulous lists of surrendered U-boats, each marked, numbered, and logged. But among the grey steel hulls that surfaced under white flags, 118 submarines failed to appear. They had neither surrendered nor been scuttled. They had simply vanished. The British Admiralty called it statistical discrepancy. The US Navy called it lost at sea. But buried inside a 1947 Royal Navy memorandum titled Operation Nightglass, one phrase stands out: unregistered transatlantic signals persist, bearing Kriegsmarine cipher structure. Origin: South Atlantic, 42° and south by 59° and west. The coordinates point to empty ocean, closer to Patagonia than to any naval base. Declassified Argentine naval archives reveal that between June and August 1945, coastal patrols recorded 3 unregistered submarines surfacing near Puerto Madryn. Their hulls bore no flags. Witnesses describe black uniforms without insignia and cargo unloaded into waiting trucks under cover of darkness. Local fishermen later reported sealed crates carried inland by men speaking German. Argentine authorities, led by Admiral Hector Venengo Lima, denied the incidents, yet his private correspondence to Buenos Aires contradicts that denial. Foreign vessels arrived, assistance provided per prior arrangement, cargo humanitarian in nature. When Lima was confronted decades later, he simply said, "Some agreements are not meant for daylight." British naval intercepts around the same time detected low-frequency communications matching Kriegsmarine Enigma patterns. The transmissions, however, used an altered key setting, unrecorded in any wartime cipher logs. They were brief, repeating only 2 phrases: "Eclipse complete, proceed Nightglass." Analysts initially believed they referred to Operation Eclipse in Europe, but cross-referencing the dates revealed a chilling coincidence. The first Nightglass signal was logged on May 10, 1945, the same day Berlin officially fell. From that moment, a silent hunt began. The Royal Navy dispatched HMS Carnelian and HMS Mariner to the South Atlantic under the guise of weather reconnaissance. Their true mission, as later revealed in declassified Admiralty orders, was to locate and intercept any unauthorized submersible of German construction. On July 3, 1947, Mariner transmitted a final message: contact established, engaged, then nothing. The ship and her 86 crew were never found. The British government attributed the loss to extreme weather, yet no storm was recorded in the region that week. In Washington, US Naval Intelligence launched a joint task force under Commander Harold G. Wentworth, codenamed Echo Black Santifamaramen. Its mission mirrored the British effort to triangulate residual German naval transmissions. Declassified fragments from Project Paperclip suggest that captured Kriegsmarine officers, including U-boat engineer Friedrich Scherf, provided maps of secondary departure zones along Norway's fjords. where late-war submarines equipped with snorkel systems could refuel undetected. Several entries mention Type fictional U-boats modified for extended autonomy. The Type fictional could stay submerged for weeks, but Scherf's notes mention Type WWII, range indefinite. Allied engineers dismissed this as impossible. Still, by 1947, both British and American analysts admitted privately that the missing fleet could not be explained through normal attrition. Argentine intelligence files, unsealed briefly during the 1990s, show that in 1958 a Chilean trawler reported striking a metallic object 50 kilometers off the coast of Valdivia. Divers found a rusted conning tower bearing the faded number U-977. Curiously, U-977 was already accounted for. It had surrendered in Mar del Plata in 1945. The Chilean Navy confiscated the wreckage, claiming it was an industrial container. 2 months later, the trawler sank in calm seas, its crew unaccounted for. In 1962, a US Navy acoustic array in the South Atlantic picked up rhythmic sonar pulses, identical in frequency to WWII-era German U-boat echo sounders. The pattern repeated every 72 hours, emanating from an area known among sailors as the Dead Channel, a region infamous for magnetic interference and navigational anomalies. Operation Nightglass was briefly reactivated under new authority. Declassified portions of the mission log refer cryptically to presence confirmed, pursuit abandoned by order of command. The reasoning for abandonment remains redacted, yet one line in the appendix reveals what may have been the real cause. Cargo confirmed recovered by third party. Political implications severe. Researchers tracing this trail point to an unmarked US Navy transport vessel, the USS Laramie, which departed Buenos Aires in December 1947, with sealed cargo listed only as metallic scientific apparatus. A month later, the same ship docked in New York and unloaded 23 crates under FBI supervision. The cargo was never inventoried. However, a US customs document archived under unrelated trade files mentions optical equipment of German origin. It was signed off by an officer whose name recurs throughout post-war intelligence exchanges, Alan Dulles. The link between the missing submarines and post-war smuggling operations becomes clearer through interrogation transcripts of captured SS logistics officers. One, Karl-Heinz Plager, claimed under oath that the final convoy carried archives and blueprints intended for continuation of the Reich beyond Europe. His statement, dismissed at the time, aligns disturbingly with Argentine construction records from 1946, noting foreign investors building fortified compounds in Neuquén province. Locals later called them the German farms. Satellite photographs from the 1970s show structures with architecture inconsistent with local style, symmetrical bunkers, reinforced perimeters, and communication masts designed for shortwave transmission. In 1992, a cache of undeveloped film surfaced in Buenos Aires during a private estate sale. The negatives were authenticated as pre-1945 AGFA stock. Among them were blurred images of men in Kriegsmarine uniforms standing beside a submarine marked only with the symbol of a crescent moon intersecting a crosshair, the same emblem referenced in the Operation Nightglass files. In one frame, a hand-drawn label on a crate reads, Project Morgenrot, Project Dawn. What Project Dawn entailed remains unknown, but several surviving Nazi technical documents recovered elsewhere mention it in relation to navigation beyond terrestrial magnetics. Official naval records continue to list all missing U-boats as lost due to enemy action or self-destruction, yet among sailors of the South Atlantic patrol routes, a superstition persists. They speak of ghost signals on long-wave frequencies, repeating in a slow mechanical rhythm. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. A distress call, perhaps, or a warning. When asked in 2001 about the long-suppressed Nightglass files, an elderly Admiralty archivist responded simply, "The ocean keeps its witnesses better than we do." Indeed, the South Atlantic remains a graveyard of steel and secrets, its depths silent and cold. But for those who still tune their receivers at night, there are moments when the static breaks, just enough to hear a voice repeating, faint but deliberate. Nightglass complete. Await instruction. Chapter 5. The Iron Hand Protocol. Stalin's Forgotten Bargain. In December 1944, as Soviet forces crossed the Vistula and the German front disintegrated, Joseph Stalin authorized a directive that would never appear in Soviet war records. It bore the simple title Directive 472, Железная рука, or Iron Hand. To the outside world, it was presumed to concern troop movements towards Silesia. In truth, Iron Hand was the code name for a covert diplomatic and intelligence pact between the NKVD and select Western Allied contacts to exchange captured personnel, documents and technology before the war's end. The stated purpose: to secure all scientific materials vital to post-war security before German collapse renders recovery impossible. The unstated purpose: to ensure both East and West possessed leverage over the other long before peace was declared. Fragments of this pact surfaced decades later through cross-referenced archives in Moscow, London, and Washington. One memo, recovered from the Russian State Military Archive, details a meeting held in Stockholm on January 4, 1945, between Soviet attaché Alexander Kobylov and a British intelligence officer operating under the alias Greylock. The meeting's minutes, translated after the Cold War, revealed chilling precision. Exchange of personnel per Iron Hand. Soviets deliver scientists from Buchenwald Group. British to deliver Abwehr, list number 52, and one copy of cipher schedule Tidewater. Delivery at Zurich, February. Each side sought what the other feared to lose: proof, research, and men whose knowledge could rewrite the post-war balance. While Soviet armies advanced westward, NKVD units were instructed to divert from frontline combat to secure German research installations. One such unit, the 9th Technical Division under Colonel Pavel Rudenko, reached Breslau ahead of the Red Army's main columns. There they discovered hundreds of crates belonging to Reichsforschungsrat, the German Research Council. The contents included laboratory journals, rolls of film, and equipment bearing the insignia of the SS Ahnenerbe. Within days, 2 American officers attached to the OSS appeared at Rudenko's headquarters, requesting joint custody under existing liaison agreements. Rudenko refused. His unit was found dead 3 weeks later, shot execution style, the archives gone. The next Soviet report on the area described total loss due to enemy artillery. In London, Foreign Office correspondence from early 1945 refers obliquely to Stalin's proposal for reciprocal handling of undesirable assets. A cable from Churchill's staff to the US Embassy uses the phrase, "Iron exchange of hands now active." Washington's reply, dated February 11th, the same day as the Yalta Conference, simply reads, "Certain exchanges to proceed under separate authority. Roosevelt has been informed." No record of that separate authority has ever been declassified. The human dimension of Iron Hand was more disturbing than any paper trail. Soviet transport manifests from 1945 list dozens of technical specialists shipped from occupied German territories to undisclosed locations in the Urals. Cross-checking names reveals that several reappear years later in American and British industry under new identities. Among them was Dr. Armin Köhler, a biophysicist linked to nerve agent experiments in Sachsenhausen. Soviet records show him transferred to an NKVD camp near Sverdlovsk in July 1945. US immigration lists show an Arthur Keller, chemical engineer, arriving in Boston in 1952. Fingerprint analysis conducted by a journalist in 1994 confirmed they were the same man. When Stalin died in 1953, fragments of Iron Hand were rediscovered by Beria's Internal Security Review, a report titled Operation 472 Residuals details that Western partners failed to uphold their end of several exchanges, specifically regarding documents labeled Gelb Zeit, yellow time. These files allegedly contained evidence of Soviet and Allied cooperation in concealing certain German war crimes for post-war political expedience. The report concludes with the chilling note, "Archives buried under Western custody until necessity arises." 2 months later, Beria was executed and Iron Hand disappeared from Soviet vocabulary. The story resurfaced in 1972 when a defector from East Berlin, identified publicly only as Carl M., approached British intelligence with microfiche copies of NKVD communications. Among them were transcripts of Zurich meetings between Western and Soviet agents spanning 1944 to 1946. One page lists an exchange schedule. Engineer H, code Raven, delivered 21 March 1945. Scientist pair, designation E3, to Stockholm. Return of case materials from Minsk 17. The engineer H listed matched the profile of Helmut Habermann, a propulsion expert from Peenemünde, who officially died in 1945. British Ministry of Defence rosters, however, record a Harold Hammond employed at a defence laboratory in Oxfordshire in 1951 with identical credentials. Hammond's personnel file was destroyed in a fire in 1978. To those inside intelligence circles, Iron Hand was never myth. It was insurance. The unspoken agreement allowed both blocs to absorb what they needed from the Reich without exposing their own duplicity. Each side had knowledge of the other's compromises, ensuring mutual silence. Evidence of this unholy symmetry emerged in 1960 when the Soviet Union abruptly halted its propaganda about Western scientists employing Nazi researchers. At the same time, the United States declined to publicize captured NKVD war crimes during the occupation of Poland. Both governments benefited from the burial of the same truth. Declassified US National Security Council minutes from 1954 contain one haunting line under the heading, Post-War Scientific Integration. Iron Hand legacy materials to remain outside formal disclosure. Balance of leverage must be preserved. The phrase balance of leverage echoes almost word for word a 1945 NKVD memo describing the same pact. Iron Hand ensures parity, knowledge for knowledge, silence for silence. The agreement had survived the war, metastasized into the Cold War itself. Even now, Russian and Western archives refuse access to the full record. The KGB file on Directive 472 remains redacted under strategic biographical protection. In Britain, MI5 holds a sealed folder labeled IR 47 Hand, unopened since 1946. The United States officially denies possessing related documents, yet a 2009 FOIA request revealed an internal reference to Iron Hand, Zurich file, among the CIA's Cold War cryptologic holdings. When pressed for comment, the agency responded, "Records of this nature cannot be confirmed or denied due to bilateral agreements still in effect." The bargain forged in the shadows of a dying war endures in the bureaucratic frost of modern secrecy. The Iron Hand Protocol was not just a transaction, it was the birth of the world that followed, one built on shared guilt and selective memory. Its architects are all long dead, but their silence remains legally binding. The last surviving reference appears in a 1963 note from a Soviet archivist to the Central Committee. Per Directive 472, retain duplicates of all transfers. Destroy originals after confirmation by Western liaison. The note is signed only with an initial, S, and below it, in pencil, a final instruction in English. Do not release. Agreement lives as long as we do. In the dim corridors of declassified history, a pattern begins to emerge. Eclipse, Redline, the Cold Vault, Night Glass, Iron Hand, threads of one long operation that transcended nations and ideologies. Each story, buried under new governments and sealed archives, hints that the Second World War never truly ended. It simply changed jurisdictions, somewhere in forgotten warehouses, beneath reconstructed cities, and under seas mapped but never explored. Fragments of the hidden war still pulse like static on an old radio frequency. Perhaps one day the sealed orders will surface, names unredacted, coordinates confirmed. But until then, the silence of those who knew remains louder than any confession. The war may be over, but its shadows are still moving.